Bowman. What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm alive and well and highly favored.
Hey,
Yes.
man, that's what I like to hear. And I feel the same way. Look, when I became aware of you, I became aware of you through the context of Reframe Inc. and the fact that is your organization that you're founding. Um, we all have a moment that kind of like, well, let me not say we all have. I know for me, I have had a moment and then like a series of smaller moments, been like big moments where I was like, all right, it's time for me to, I gotta, I gotta go.
Right.
What
Right. Pivot.
moment was that for you?
Yeah. Thank you for having me and taking the time in terms of living corporate. I think your question in itself. I can describe it as early on in my career. I started my career out at Pepsi, and it was my first job out of business school, undergrad rather. I went to South Carolina State University and HBCU,
Yeah.
and I was entering like year four, and a lot of people when they asked me, early in my career, it's like, oh, where are you in purchase? We're in New York. I said, no, I was in the field. I started on the back of a Pepsi truck, and I managed about 14 routes. And so you think about that, it gave me experience across every class of trade from a retail perspective. And so I was looking for the next way to elevate. And a young lady named Candy Walls, who I'm still in contact with today, was going around the country doing installations of a handheld piece of technology. Because everything prior to that, dated, was very old technology. And so I was on that implementation team, and she had worked with me over the course of 6 months. She said, hey, have you ever thought about business school? It's time for you to get out of there, get out of here. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm doing great. I'm 26, 27, balling, running a whole distribution center.
Yeah.
I was in Augusta, Georgia. And so she telling me to look beyond and aim higher. And so it was right at that moment that I began to get a better understanding of her background, what is business school, pros and cons. And immediately I began to pursue the path of getting my MBA. And actually graduated from Clark Atlanta University with my master's in business. That was a bit of a moment of getting an entry into Pepsi. And the other one was making the decision of pivoting, aiming higher in terms of going after my MBA.
I asked because I think for me and for a lot of folks I talk to, typically that pivot into like entrepreneurship is something that's kind of like negative, right? Like your boss be on some
Yeah.
bullshit. You're like, you know what? Let me just go and get up out of here. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna tell you mine real fast. Since we here, Jeffrey, this was only last year. So, I'm at this job and it started off really great, right? I was kind of positioned as, oh, you're gonna be the next in line to take over the company, blah, blah, blah. We're gonna, put you in position. You're like my successor, talking to the person who's the CEO. And I was like, cool. But y'all know I got this other business, right? Living Corporate was right there. I was still doing Living Corporate on the side. And I told him I'm not about to stop. And so, time goes on. I realize, okay, this is way more dysfunctional than I was advertised. Oh, okay, this person not really in charge like I thought. And then one day, Jeffrey, like I was told, hey, we're going to hire somebody and we're going to hire somebody who wants you to help put their job description together and put their comp package together. I was like, oh, okay, cool, no problem. And so put the whole thing together for them. And when they get hired, though, when they describe their job, Jeffrey, it sounds like my job. And I said, well, that's not what we had talked about, right? And then like around the same time that I was looking at them funny for doing that, Living Corporate closed a huge account. And I was like, oh, well, time to go ahead and hit them with the Kevin Gates. I had to get up out of there. I was out of there. I left.
Right.
And I think like so often it's like when I talk to people who look like me, like it's typically something like that. It's something, mine was much less emotional. Than it probably could have been.
Because you've been building it.
Because I've been building it, right? But what I like about how you're sharing your story is it doesn't really sound like it was anything necessarily traumatic or disrespectful. It was more of someone came alongside you, gave you some game, and then you decided just to elevate, to do something different. As you think about your current role, CEO and founder of Reframe, Reframe Inc., I think we also have moments where like, okay, how real is this thing that I'm doing? Right? Like, okay, yep, I'm going to try, but I'm going to give it like a year. I'm going to give it like 2 years. At what point did you realize like, wait, no, I'm going to be able to do this. And like, this is now what I do.
Yeah. So I gave you a short version. That was, I consider that was probably the ending of chapter 1, Careerwise, and I think I've had 3 chapters. And the thing I want to communicate and articulate, I think there's a generation of people in the workforce, whether they're entrepreneurs or they work or build a dream. That I have the luxury of the idea that I could actually start something. And so the reason I say that, I like to say, I know I look young, but first to graduate from college, my family. And so I say that to say that a lot of us that graduated, I'll call it post Generation 3, post civil rights, maybe have the inkling or the idea of it, but for a lot of us that didn't come up in an environment where entrepreneurship was encouraged, you had a safety mechanism, and that was actually going into corporate. Now, for me, I was always an entrepreneur. I had 3 jobs in high school. I drove a bus, worked at Kenny's Shoes, and worked at Little Caesars Pizza. So I always had money in my pocket. And so for me, going into corporate right out of it was security, because there was no one else to catch me. I couldn't even move back home because I shared a room with my mom. So there was no exit. And that's exit plan to catch you if you fell. And so with that, it wasn't until the 90s, I went back to business school in 1996 to 98. And a lot of people think, and it was in Atlanta, the ATL, Freaknik, Olympics, culture, music. It was about to explode.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people also knew at that particular time, that was the really beginning of the internet. And so for a lot of people that went back to school, to business school specifically, I had 23 jobs coming out of business school. Now, why? I was a hustler.
Because you him.
2, I am him. and the other piece behind it is that because a lot of us chose brand management, marketing, that was this little thing happening in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. They were not recruiting at the schools that I went to. They were building the ecosystem at that particular time for the Harvards, the Stanfords.
They was laying the exclusivity down early.
Early. I went to Procter & Gamble as an intern. Great internship. But our overall summer project was, why should Procter & Gamble invest in this little known thing called the internet? And so
Wow.
that was really my first exposure. Now, I was a techie. I had a Commodore VIC-20, Commodore 64. I had no idea where my mother got the money from. No idea, right? Think about
Yeah.
that. But that exposed me as to what risk or perceived risk people were taking outside of securing a brand management or a consulting gig, which most people get. And so with that, I still can lead because guess what? I had student loans, right?
Right. Right.
But what I did do is I took that idea of the internet and the idea of direct home delivery, store delivery, which I was at Pepsi, products were delivered on the truck. We call that direct store delivery. Now, prior to the invention of direct store delivery, where did people get their products delivered? To the home.
Yeah.
Right? Now, with the invention of the internet, people now have a mechanism for commerce and exchange on what we now call platform. And so I had the foresight. So I started a company called iBagit in 1998 that essentially was the making of Amazon. I studied Amazon, 10K reports. Now, at that particular time, I was building a direct home delivery service where I had grocery background, right?
Yeah.
I delivered products. So for me, the mechanism of the internet was at some point, they're like, the sodas delivered from the store to the home. Then I want all these other things. Now, the unfortunate part, that was in 1998. So I built my startup plan and went back and forth between Milwaukee because I went and worked in brand management at Miller Brewing Company. And I'm pitching iBagit at the time, Amazon, Webvan, Peapod, Home Grocer. Now, this is way before Obama came in and passed the laws from an investment standpoint. That was a gift, right?
Yeah.
So I'm out trying to raise money. These guys were raising $1 billion to build their service offering because it had to be subsidized. And so I went all the way. I raised $25,000. Peanuts. The access wasn't there. There was no venture capital access. I didn't know who to call. There was no Blacks in Tech. There was none of that.
Yeah.
And so I say that to say there's a generation of people that were born, started their careers in the early 2000s after the laws changed, gave them access to capital. But I had to go back. I was working night. I had to go back in, went to corporate strategy, then went to Dell, and then the market shifted and changed after the laws was passed. But by then, you missed the infrastructure development like we have right now in terms of artificial intelligence. So now you have to create an enterprise on top of the infrastructure, which is great, right?
It's the same.
But it's the you think about Sam Altman, he's going to be probably our first trillionaire because they're laying the infrastructure down. And so I took that and I did a lot of digitalization development. I went into the transformation business. In chapter 2 of my career, as the internet matured, as digital matured, I was literally on the forefront. I ran econometric modeling for Dell, and for most people don't know what that is, that's math marketing. And so that everything is measured in terms of calls and response from a performance standpoint. I was on the forefront of that, then went to Sears and led their digitalization efforts. And they wanted to be like Amazon, right? At that particular time, they were on, in their last chapters. But all of those learnings I developed early on, but still cannot jump out, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I went to Ogilvy after leaving Sears where I got the question of a lifetime. And the question was, if David Ogilvy were here, what would the agency look like? And so for me, in that question, was a full circle moment because in the positions that I had the luxury of awarding contracts, managing agencies, service providers. And so I understood the inequity associated with the practice of general market and multicultural marketing and the inequity practice of talent, human resources, and DEI. And so that question gave me a framework, a foundation that said, here's an opportunity for make significant impact and write a new playbook in terms of how do you transform organizations for the new majority. And that's where at Ogilvy, I got the chance to write a thought leadership piece, go out and develop a framework, go out with actual clients and test and learn that framework, and then go out and see if it worked. So I became much more of an entrepreneur in the professional services organization, and that exploded because I brought the learnings and the teachings that I learned in corporate, the entrepreneurial framework, working for professional service companies, because based on hours, contracts, right, which a lot of us don't get experience in terms of you can write a check and you can learn how to ask for a check.
Right.
And oftentimes when you're in corporate, you know how to write that check, but you don't know how to ask for that check. And when you make that crossover from, building someone else's dream to building your dream, you got to learn how to ask for a check. And so that's why I say that was a journey to a position to where I could start Reframe. And after built the industry's first customer design practice with Ogilvy culture, that gave me the as someone told me, sometimes when you are an entrepreneur, especially when you are first generation or even second generation, pad your landing because you're going to fall. And so as much of a buffer like you have, it makes the journey that much more high probability to be in business more than 1 year.
100%.
That's a long version.
No, it's a great version, and I appreciate the context, right? Because so much of, and your story is so interesting because it resonates with mine, right? When I think about living corporate has been around since 2018, but what was interesting about it grew and matured as I grew and matured, because I'm not the same person I was in 2018, right? I was a consultant at Accenture. So while I'm learning about, to your point, how contracts work and how to reply to pitch decks and how to put things together, proposals and things of that nature, I'm stocking that away just as me as a professional. Then I'm going on and I'm building like analytics solutions, and and because I'm in a professional services context. So like I think it's really hard to it's hard to oversell how much a professional services background can help in your entrepreneurial journey, because you have to basically be an entrepreneur already, especially for Black folks. The Black folks at the Ogilvies and the Accentures and the PwCs of the world, the Capgems of the world, we don't have our own like book of business to handle. We got to go out and we work for a partner, and then we have to, we grow. We have to. It's just it's really a hustle, right? I think, and so when you come from that and you're learning, okay, well, here's what customer success looks like. And here's, again, to your point, how to ask for a check, how to scope things and make sure that you understand cost and margin and all those different things in a really tangible way, beyond what I believe, and no shade to business school, but beyond what business school can teach you, right? Because so often people go to business school and they go where, Jeffrey? To consulting, to your earlier point. So having that professional service consultative exposure and experience, I believe, tremendously helped me. And being able to kind of build products and things internally at different places and really kind of test them out and see where, because there's so, and to see what client, like, now the challenge is that it's like how much of this is successful because I built it, and how much is successful because I'm sitting behind this huge brand, but it's still a phenomenal experience. And you can kind of push and ask questions to kind of understand, okay, hey, if I didn't work at this big old logo and this partner wasn't sitting behind me, would this client still say yes? We got to see. But it's still a phenomenal experience to have. So that's really dope. That's dope that you were able to do that, right? You're not going into the market cold turkey or just kind of blind, because you're coming in these spaces. And yeah, you're right. Like I had a financial cushion, but there's also, I think also like what you're describing is also like a technical cushion, right? If you're able to go into entrepreneurship with this wealth of experience and proven track record that you have done, hey, I know, even though I'm doing it on my own, I know I can do this because I did it over here. Yeah. I just happen to be doing it for myself right now, but I'm still doing it. Let's continue forward though, because we're gonna keep on. Honestly, I can already tell you we're gonna cut this at a reasonable time so we can do part 2. Because I want to talk to you about because Reframe, I know that it was restructured as a whole company, and y'all have AI tech and consulting offerings.
Yeah,
I want to talk about this. Say it one more time.
Services and software. We started out as a service company, and then we built software that helps we're providing on the service side.
Yeah, so it's interesting because again, man, we definitely got to connect on the we just got to talk. We've been talking on the phone this whole time to coordinate this interview, but we got to like talk for real. It's just so eerily, like some of these things are just so eerily similar. So as it pertains to just where we are, you talked about Sam Altman earlier, this AI space, right? Now look, I'm gonna go ahead and jump out there. I ain't trying to tease it, right? Okay, you can disagree, but we can just have the conversation. I really think. Let me back up and say something. And this is Real Talk Tuesday. I'm gonna just say it, okay? I don't. As I look at the tech space, 99% of the things that come out of tech, white tech bro culture, is vaporware. Yeah. Right? That's my stance.
Yeah.
That, like, I'm not. Yeah. Now there's some code. There's code, and there's little pieces of things that are real, right? Yeah. But the things that come out that are marketed as X are very rarely, from what I see, X. It's typically like, oh, this has value, but not at the scale or the way that you say. And so, I've experienced that directly working in tech for a huge virtual online survey company. I've also seen it in consulting, but I would say that this AI space is a really great, the latest example, right? So I believe that generative AI has value. I believe that it's real. But I think what happens in the tech space is folks who are in the know, who understand the tech, have an advantage because people will often see some technology, and because because the general public doesn't understand technology, they then project a bunch of assumptions about what the tech actually is. So like generative AI is not Jarvis in the Iron Man suit. Generative AI is not whatever the virus is in Terminator that killed everybody. Generative AI is a bunch of math that is based against predictions and assumptions of various inputs, like stacked on top of each other, tens of thousands of hundreds of millions of times, right? It's but my challenge is that when you look at AI, right, so often it's not presented like that, Jeffrey. It's presented as this end-all solution that's going to think for you and like ideate and do things that human beings do. And so like, I'm curious as to your posture and position on the real function of AI, especially, and also I'll say my bad. Last thing is, I think like if it wasn't Goldman Sachs, it was some other like analyst report that came out recently that said, look, AI is expensive. It doesn't solve complex problems. and it, it has serviceability, but like in very clear, this concrete context. But
Right.
the bubble's going to be here for a while, so we're going to go ahead and invest in it.
Yeah.
Right? I'm curious as to your stance on this tech. AI has been around for a while, but this generative AI is like, of course, just taking the world by storm. Where do you stand on it?
So you asked a loaded question with a lot of subheads. So I want to go back to a point that I think is really important to have on film, and that is the ability to tell a story that is future forward, and gives people the ability to imagine. And the reason I wanted to come back to this is because I think for a lot of Black, and I'm going to be very specific, Black tech founders, the way that we're taught, and it's generational, in our homes, as around narrative and storytelling, oftentimes is based on truth. And because of that, oftentimes there's fear associated with reality that we are oftentimes asked to tell stories. Now, is that good for context? When I went out, so me and a bunch of people started Blacks in Tech at South by Southwest during the early years. And I got to see a lot of the foundations in terms of how social media was being marketed, right? Very similar. And so a lot of times, from my experience, I can't speak, we had on the doorstep forming Tech 2.0, and you did have the bubble in 2000. Social media did reinvigorate the technology ecosystem in terms of, going beyond email, going beyond the internet in terms of, the early stages of search. You had a pretend entry point through this thing called AOL, where you actually could go directly on the internet, which again buys into the narrative of a lot of smoke and mirrors. Now, the reason I want to bring up is that flash forward, 2015, starting Reframe, leaving Ogilvy, nice ad. Verizon was my first customer. Won them Prudential United based on my background. And then made the pivot to how do I want to scale my business? Tech. I'm not going to paint pretty pictures and go into the creative space. I'm going to do it, scale it through software. I'm going to design a framework that's assess, which asks questions. And then I'm going to be able to cluster your responses based on your attitudes and behaviors with segments. And then I'm going to treat those attitudes and behaviors by first building an algorithm that drives predicted outcome. So it automates everything that I was doing in a human one-to-one basis, right? That's the framework. And so when I went out, joined an accelerator, I noticed these white boys could tell these stories that were based on a 10-page deck. And there's no there. And then they go out and they raise $2 million. I'm like, where's the piano? I don't understand. I actually have a business.
Right.
And so oftentimes it was hard for me to do what I considered lying. They called it FOMO. Okay? the performance was bananas. You got to build $100 million in 5 years? That doesn't seem real to me. Right? And so what I had to realize, there was a shift happening in terms of narrative forming, because there had been so much wealth created in the early stages of, let's say, Web 1.0, that it created these cottage industries where people now could take all that money and make bets and form these things called venture capitalists, move away from Silicon Valley. They go to New York, they go to Chicago, and now everybody's running down to Miami, right? Mm-hmm. But that's what a generation of, I don't want to call them kids, but this is a generation that grew up learning how to tell stories about the future to create FOMO because they had to subsidize their business model. And so that's why you and I may look at it as like, that's crazy. But to this newly formed industry, every pitch comes in like that. And so for us, part of it is we got to learn how to tell better stories, right? And now look, we can talk all day, all night about, the shortage of capital that goes to Black and brown and women founders. But I will say there's a deficit in terms of how we tell our stories. Because you're walking right to the edge of almost lying, right? Fraud.
Yeah.
In some cases, right?
It feels like that, Jeffrey, right? Like, and I'm gonna be honest, it is like that, right? Like, man, I'm telling you, I've seen
and then they lose money, and then the investors say, well, we believe in founders that have done it twice. Multiple. Well, that's when ageism sets in, right? In order to do that, you think about you have a 10-year runway, you have to be less than 30. So you can come out and try and recoup the money, pay your investors back for the money that they lost. Right. So there's a gamification of this of the system. It ain't fair. It's not. But it is what it is. And so where I land is that at the end of the day, a business has revenue, minus operating expenses, gives you a margin, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and create the next unicorn. But what I will say to investors, now you've got a generation of people of color that have done well in terms of wealth, but you still have a significant deficit in terms of Black and brown households where net worth is below zero.
Right.
So I say to a lot of the founders that do get funded, don't waste this opportunity. Instead of 100 million, maybe it's a 50 million, right? And so you can't buy into the idea of you're going to scale, which a lot of people may or may not know of. Like you try the approach of blitz scaling your business when you really haven't validated whether or not you have a customers or significant customers. And so you burn through $2 million. 8% of small businesses make less than $1 million.